So you wanted to talk about group placement? I think the first step to figure out is whether you want to be product agnostic or industry agnostic. There are product groups such as M&A, leverage finance, where you really focus on a specific product. And then there are industry/coverage groups, which are your healthcare, tech, industrials, stuff like that, which actually cover a specific industry. So trying to figure out if you want your experience to be more focused on a specific product and you get to see a variety of different industries, or you want to be in a specific industry and get to see an array of different products. It's really up to your preference. At least when I was going through it myself, I wanted to see all the different products. I didn't want to just be focused on M&A or debt financing. I wanted to see all of it. So that's how I decided to choose an industry group. The great thing about joining is that it's a very broad experience, and I think that's why a lot of people really go for this career in terms of exit opportunities and just being exposed to a lot of different industries, different financial products, and the world of corporate finance in general. Definitely go in with your set of priorities and values. What is most important to you? And you kind of get a sense of that when you go through the networking process, when you're trying to figure out which group you want to be placed into. This networking process typically takes place over a couple months at around like springtime, just a couple months before your start date in the summer. You'll be able to reach out to all the different groups from analysts, associates, etc., and really be able to kind of talk to them, get a sense of what the group is like. Even though, of course, everyone will kind of put their group in a positive light, you can kind of tell how close people are and what their dynamic is if you talk to enough people. For me, my key priorities were deal flow. I really thought it was important to get good experience, something to put on my resume, and something to really speak for. Second, and probably more important, was the people. You are going to be spending 80 to 100 hours a week with these team members, and now that I'm actually in it myself, I can definitely say that it makes a huge difference enjoying who you work for versus when you don't necessarily enjoy who you're working with. If you're in a good group and you're working with a really good team that's really supportive of you, no matter how long the days are, working with them will make it much more bearable. Even if I worked less hours and I was working with a team that doesn't necessarily have my best interest in mind, or have team members who are really only looking out for themselves, it could even make the short days on the job seem like forever. Also, I would just keep in mind about like the general group culture. For example, I really liked groups that were more social, had a lot of events, and was just larger in general because you get more diverse experience, not just from the group perspective, but also the people that you work with. So the last thing I considered was my personal interest in the industry or the product that I would be going into. For me, this was less of a factor just because I was pretty much open to all of these industries. I just want to make sure I didn't go into one that would really silo me or put me in a pigeonhole for future opportunities. For example, a lot of people will go into a specific group because of its exit opportunities, and say if you go into, financial institutions or real estate, it might be a little bit harder to transition versus if you did like general M&A, for example. I think at this stage, I wanted to be open to every single thing. So I just kind of started networking with an open mind and kind of just focused on what aspects of the conversation I was interested in. If they talked about a specific deal that they worked on and I found my interest piqued because of that, what was most important for me was my connection with that person. Did I feel like this person was someone who I could get along with? Or what did they say about their group dynamic? Are they very collaborative? Also, do I feel like they were able to find mentorship or people who they worked well with together? So these are some of the questions that I directly asked them just to get a sense of what their personal experience was like. Were they able to get enough guidance when they joined, especially because the learning curve during your first year is so steep? I wanted to make sure that I was putting myself in a position where even if I didn't know anything going in, because to be frank, most people won't, that I would get enough mentorship and people would do their best to train me to become the best analyst possible and do well in the job. Speaking from a second year perspective now, I can say that group placement is extremely important. I have friends across different groups, and our experiences honestly vary quite drastically based on our experiences. And this is a factor of multiple different things. And I just want to put a disclaimer out there that group culture and how someone feels about a group will constantly change just because the turnover in the industry is very fast. For example, like my group was known to be very social, like everyone liked to get together for drinks, for events and stuff like that. But if the key people who organize these events started to leave, maybe that would not be as much of a case. Once you talk to the analysts and associates and try to get a sense of what their genuine experience is like and try to get an honest and very transparent view from them, if possible, also try to get a sense of what the managing directors are like, because inevitably these would be the seniors that you're working for. I was fortunate enough to be able to do so on some groups. Other ones are more busy or that may not be as acceptable. I would try to spend more time on the networking aspect and really take this really seriously, because once you get into a group and you start interning there, it is very difficult to switch. It is possible, at least for the bulge bracket bank that I was working at, you could accept the return offer but not accept the return offer into the group. If for whatever reason you didn't have the experience that you thought you were going to have and wanted to try to place into another group. However, this tends to leave you with the groups that are less popular. The ones that are less popular tend to be the ones that do have remaining spots. So for example, instead of having 12 groups to choose from when you did before your internship, you might only have, say, like 4 or 5. And those are typically comprised of the groups where people chose not to accept their offers and decide to go back into the generalist pool. Again, this varies from bank to bank, so this is only from a perspective of one person and from one bank of how it operates. So make sure to do your research. There are some forums such as like the Wall Street Oasis where you can kind of look up the best groups, and people typically tend to ask these questions because it is really important. Your internship will likely turn into your full-time offer, and once you start in that group, that will be your work life. So just keeping that in mind. These banks are not as mobile internally. It is possible. It just takes a little bit longer and probably has a lot of internal traps compared to other places. Tread carefully with the group that you're choosing, the people who are in these groups, and just do your research and really conduct your due diligence. Do as much networking as you can beforehand so you can really make an informed decision. Also, once it comes down to rankings, this is kind of like a mutual selection process where the groups will rank you as an intern and you will rank them, and they will do like a matching process. You should definitely communicate what your preferences are. I told the key people that I found within the groups, basically once I had finalized my list and the group placement rankings were coming up and the deadline was closely approaching, I told these key people that this group was my top choice. Now, from the other side of the perspective, it is really important for us to know whether or not we are an intern's first choice, because that factors into our decision. We want to make sure that we're choosing the ones that we really like that also like us. So knowing that is really helpful from the full-time perspective as well. Another piece of advice that I have is to try to find a point person within the groups that you really care about. What I mean by this is if you have a good conversation with someone and you just kind of maybe have a second follow-up phone call, if you're able to just like kind of ask them if they'd be willing to kind of be your point person. I know this might vary, so I would take this with a grain of salt, but from what I did was I found a point person. I basically asked them if they could be the person I go to ask about like group related stuff. Basically, if I had reached out to say like 3 other members of that group and they didn't respond, this person can just be like, hey, like Sydney reached out, you should respond because I think she should be one of our top choices, stuff like that. Again, I would tread carefully with this one and just kind of read the situation. Make sure they're actually willing to do that type of stuff and you already have like some sort of close connection. If it's an alumni that you've talked to a lot previously and is someone who you've known in college, like maybe that can be your person. This is just really helpful because you can ask this person to help you connect with other people, so a lot of people have spoken to you, and therefore when it comes down to the rankings, you'll probably end up really high just because people know of your name. And also this person would be helpful in just hopefully giving you a very honest assessment of what the group thinks of you. For example, when I was going through the process myself, I would say this is my first choice, and if not, I would hope that this person would say like, it's like, we all really enjoy speaking with you. So not any guarantees of whether or not you're gonna get into the group, but I would hope that if they weren't going to put me at the top of their list, they would say something like, oh, it was great speaking to you, but you should consider talking to other groups that you have spoken to. So this kind of gives you a more realistic sense, so you're not like wasting your vote, your top few rankings on a group that probably isn't going to take you. Luckily, this was not the case in my experience, but just having someone there who I trusted had the ins of the information from the group, but also had my genuine thoughts and my rankings in mind was extremely helpful. And I found it was also great because when I did end up joining the group, this person was already someone who I was close to before I even started. So I got really lucky with that. And always, always, always send a thank you, and make sure to ask if there's anyone else that they would suggest you speak to. And you can kind of tell what type of person they are from the conversations you have. I've noticed for the ones that I like completely went off script, I'd have like a list of questions usually, but for the ones that I went completely off script, that's the ones where I knew the call went really well, we just really connected and could talk about everything. The conversation was just very fluid. And for others, they just like dove straight into it. Sometimes they asked me like very pointed questions about me, and they were just more on the side of like, I wouldn't say that they grilled me, but they definitely asked me like very pointed questions about my resume. You just kind of know what type of person they are and maybe what type of person they would be when you work with them. At a certain point when I was going through the process, there was someone who was basically felt like he was interviewing me, and I felt that to be the case with the rest of the group. So even though I had an interest in that, I kind of thought about, what my experience would be like if I had been in that group. That's how it ended up crossing it off my list, actually, was the way they kind of like didn't even ask me questions about like me as a person. They just like started drilling down of all the bullet points on my resume. As if I was still in the interview process when I had already gotten the offer at that point. It really depends on your personal preference. Again, that was not something I was necessarily looking for. I was looking for a group that had strong deal flow, had really good people, where I could find mentorship, as well as just a very supportive class of analysts and associates. I was also looking for something where I had a little bit of interest in the industry, at least, and generally had a very social culture. It will really vary from person to person, I guess is what I'm saying. So make sure you have those in mind as you're going through the process. I would also be cautious about how you're approaching it because you probably don't have that much time. I would keep an open mind at first and talk to as many people as possible, but you should really start narrowing down to your top 3, maybe like 1 week before the deadline, just having your top 3 figured out so you can communicate and you can make sure that you are communicating that before they decide to rank them. At the end of the day, no matter what group you end up in, just know that you can always make the most out of your experience even if you didn't get your top choice. And who knows, like once you start, it could be completely different than what you had imagined, because when you're networking, you're only really hearing it through the phone. So once you start, it could be completely different, and just make sure you're going into it with a very open mind and that this isn't the end all be all. It is important and it does set you up if the group does end up being what you expected it to be, but just know that there are always other options and you can still make the most out of your 2, 3, 4, 5, however many years you want to stay. I hope that helps from a group placement perspective, and feel free to ask any questions if you have any, or comment about your experience or anything that you found that was helpful to you.